Hello, my name is Arun Jacob. I'm a Director of Product Management on the HP Helion Development Platform team. The HP Helion Development Platform is a Cloud Foundry-based platform as a service. In order to support the ODCA Hackathon, Hewlett-Packard has deployed a pre-release instance of the Helion Development Platform to allow hackathon participants to easily deploy and manage their candidate applications. Today I'm going to demonstrate how to deploy and manage an application from your laptop to a Helion Development Platform cluster. This presentation will focus on deployment and deployment requirements for a simple Python application that uses a MySQL database for persistence. I'm going to walk through the Helion development platform, then show how to do a simple deployment to that environment from the application store in that environment. I'll then walk through what the Helion development platform provides to deployed applications, and finally I'll show you how you can deploy your own applications to the Helion development platform. You will all be supplied usernames and login credentials for the hackathon. Here I'm going to log in with my personal email and come in as a developer. After I log in, I'm taken to the welcome screen, which tells me what I can do, but also gives me a bunch of links to things I actually want to do. The first thing is to download the Helion Development Platform client. This is what I need to do if I'm going to deploy an application from my laptop. I can also read the documentation, contact support, see where I can deploy to, and look at my account details. Finally, I can deploy from the application store. The application store contains many different applications written in the following languages that the Helion development platform supports: Java, Python, Ruby, PHP, Node, and Go. These applications can connect to the following Helion development platform supported backends: MySQL, RabbitMQ, Redis, Postgres, as well as the file system. I'm going to show you how you deploy one of these applications. The first thing you do is hit Deploy Application, where you're taken to a deployment page. On the deployment page, I set the space, and each of you will have a default space assigned, as well as the domain I want to run in. In this case, I'm going to run in the 15.126 domain, and I can select that I want to start the application after deployment. Then I hit Deploy Application. When I deploy an application, a page for that application is created that shows me the deployment and activity log. This is just one of the views I can see. I also get a timeline view showing me the entire history of the application. I can see the settings around my application, how much disk and memory I've got. I can see a view of the services that my application depends on. In this case, there are no services that depend on this particular application. This particular application doesn't depend on any services. I can see the routes that belong to this application, and I can see a real-time log of what's going on in the application. The other thing I wanted to show you was that the Helion development platform actually gives you the ability to auto-scale your instances. In this case, when I've turned auto-scaling on, what I've said is that I will scale up when my CPU threshold hits 86%, and I will scale down when my application threshold hits 20%. And I will scale up to 2 instances maximum and back down to 1 minimum. Let's go back and make sure that our application is actually deployed. We can do that by looking at the application itself. This application that we've deployed does simple currency conversion. Okay, so now we've gone through the application and all the management that you can do, including auto-scaling. At this point, I'm going to show you how to deploy an application from your laptop to the Helion development platform. In order to do this, you're going to need to download the client. let's get back to where we can do that. When I download the client, in this case I'm on Windows, I'll download a zip file. I've already installed the client and you should do the same. And the way to do that is to first unpack the archive, second, rename the executable for your OS or platform to Helion, third, move it to or symlink it from a system path directory or add an alias in your shell, and fourth, for Linux or Mac OS users, please make sure the file is set as executable. So I've installed this application, and you can see that from within my directory structure that I can get to it. I just wanted to validate that. So at this point, let's go ahead and focus on deploying from my laptop out to the Helion development platform. First of all, let's take a look at my current application. It's a very simple application that uses the Bottle web framework to stand up a web server where the Bottle framework actually maps paths to functions. Those functions in turn call a class called userdb that reads and writes directly from MySQL and serializes the results into a class called user. Pretty straightforward app. And when we look at it, we can validate that it runs by seeing it on localhost. So this is the application, nothing very fancy. But there are a couple parts of this application that are important to remember going forward. First of all, if you're going to deploy this to the Helion development platform, you want to make sure that your key environment variables are not hard-coded. In fact, you want to make sure that they are actually extracted from very specific environment variables. I'm going to show you that now. I get my host name and my port from these vcap app host and vcap app port variables specifically. And for those of you who are going to use one of the dependent services from Cloud Foundry, the environment variables for those supported services are given in URL format. For a database, I've had to parse the URL and assign username, password, and database names from the parse sections, and I'll show you that now. This is where I get the environment variable using the Python os.environ map. I pull it into this URL, and then I extract pieces from it. So hostname, password, user, and database name. Note that in this case, I've sliced off the preceding / in order to get the right database name. So now that we've seen the very simple code and we've seen how these database variables are externalized to environment variables, I'm going to show you how I've set them in my local environment. In my case, I'm using Eclipse and I can set them here, and you can see that vcap host has been set to local, port 8080. The MySQL URL is set to my local settings. This is important because by keeping these key variables and environment variables, we allow the Helion development platform to very easily come in and give us those variables in the future. So now that we've kind of walked through the application, let's go ahead and talk about what is needed to deploy this out to the Helion development platform. The most important thing I need is a file called a manifest.yaml file. I need this in my application top-level directory, or in this case for Python, where my source code starts from. Let's look at that manifest YAML file. It basically tells the Helion development platform how to provision the application, provision any dependent services. In my case, my application depends on MySQL, and what to do after provisioning prior to starting the application. This is manifest YAML. You can see that it's configured with applications at the top level. And under this top level, you list your app name, you list your memory requirements, you specify what's called a build pack. A build pack is something that contains language-specific libraries and environment variables that allow, say, Ruby, for instance, or Python to run. You specify the services that your application needs. Here you can see that I've specified the name of a service using the name variable from up here, -db, and I've said that this is a MySQL type service. You also specify the URL you want your application to bind to, and you can specify some environment variables underneath the staccato heading, as well as the minimum client required. And most importantly, you can tell the application what to do after staging. The hook section is where you can specify scripts or commands that to run after successfully provisioning your application. So I can configure hooks to run prior to staging the application, after staging the application, or before application startup. Keep in mind that the sequence of events for deployment is provisioning, where you get the environment to work in, staging, where you configure those environments, and running, where you actually start the application. In my post-staging hook, I've called a Python script. This Python script, create_populate_db.py, is something that actually sets up a database. Now keep in mind that my database has already been created for me and provisioned for me in manifest.yaml. And what I'm doing here is within the database, creating a table and inserting users. So I'll maximize this so you can see it. Again, creating the table and inserting users. So I use create table if not exists in the case where I'm redeploying on top of an existing instance of the application, which is something that you'll probably do a lot in the hackathon. The database in that case will already exist, so I've got to do things that are idempotent that won't fail, for instance, if the table already exists. I've done the same thing with the user insertions. I've just enclosed them in a try-catch block that handles collisions, just in case I'm ending up just rerunning the script on top of an existing database. Now that we actually understand manifest.yaml and understand what gets created within it, at least with the MySQL context, I'm going to deploy the app. So I'm going to bring up the command line, and the first thing I'm going to do is target the cluster, target the Helion development platform that I'm actually going to try to connect to, so that I use the Helion target command to do this. And I use the URL of the environment, and it tells me that I've successfully targeted. Now I'm going to log in using the same credentials I used to log into the user interface. And now, from the top level of my source code, which contains the manifest.yaml, you can see it here, I'm going to deploy to the environment that I targeted by using the Helion push command with the -n option, which tells me to read that manifest.yaml. What you're going to see is basically the same deployment process that we saw from the application that we deployed in store. The manifest.yaml basically specified the settings that we had to fill out on that deployment page, and you can see that the application is being deployed. You can see that custom Python packages are actually being downloaded, for instance, Bottle and MySQL Python. And you can see that the post install step of that create DB Python script is actually being run. We're creating a table, we're inserting users 1 and 2. And so when we go back to the application, when we go back to the Helion development platform and we look at our applications, we'll see that now we have the PAS sample application, which is what we specified and we launched from the laptop. And if you look at it, you can see that it basically looks the same as what's on my local host. Now, if I wanted to redeploy the application, in other words, make any changes on my local copy of my laptop and push, all I really have to do is re-execute that push environment, push command. So what I'm going to do here is make a very simple change. Save that change and push that change. Basically what happens is you can see that some environment variables are preserved and kept. Resource check is done again. The application is stopped and restarted. As part of that staging, the custom Python packages are re-downloaded. And even though there was an error here, this actually fundamentally works because I had some error code in my createDB stuff that caught this. So nothing really was broken or changed. And what we can see when we go to the application is when we refresh it, my change shows up. So that's it. We've walked through how to deploy an application from the application store. We've walked through the different management facilities you get in the Helion development platform, and we've walked through how to deploy an application from your laptop and redeploy it. I think this will give you the tools that you need to successfully compete in the ODCA Hackathon, and I look forward to seeing you there. Until then, take care.